Welcome to a reality that many prefer to ignore. While the United States projects an image of a world power, with its gleaming skyscrapers and economic might, there is a dark side that rarely appears on postcards. Today we will explore American cities that look more like conflict zones, places where urban decay has reached alarming levels and violence has become part of everyday life. When we think of the United States, we usually imagine New York, Los Angeles, Miami, postcards of the American dream. But the reality for millions of Americans is completely different. There are entire cities that have been abandoned by progress, where buildings crumble, crime explodes, and residents live in conditions reminiscent of war zones. Let's start with Detroit, Michigan. This city was once the beating heart of the American automotive industry, a symbol of the economic power of the United States. In its golden years, Detroit had almost 2 million inhabitants and was one of the most prosperous cities in the country. But the decline of the automotive industry transformed Motor City into a post-apocalyptic landscape. Today, Detroit has vast areas completely abandoned. Thousands of houses and buildings are in ruins, with broken windows, collapsed roofs, and vegetation taking over everything. Entire neighborhoods look like they've been bombed. The city has lost more than 60% of its population since the 1950s, leaving behind a frightening urban skeleton. The crime rate in Detroit is one of the highest in the United States. Murders, violent assaults, and car thefts are daily occurrences. There are areas of the city where the police take hours to respond to calls, and where firefighters need a police escort to attend emergencies. Residents report hearing gunshots every night, as if they lived in a conflict zone. Detroit's public schools are among the worst in the country, with dilapidated buildings, lack of basic resources, and extremely low graduation rates. Many children grow up amidst violence without real prospects for a better future. The cycle of poverty and crime perpetuates itself generation after generation. But Detroit is not alone. Camden, New Jersey, is another city that seems to have come straight out of a dystopian film. With only 70,000 inhabitants, Camden consistently appears on lists of the most dangerous cities in the United States. The rate of violent crime is frightening, being several times higher than the national average. Camden has been devastated by deindustrialization and drug trafficking. The city has become a distribution point for narcotics throughout the Philadelphia metropolitan area. Gangs control territories, and shootings are so common that many residents don't even leave their homes at nightfall. Children play in playgrounds surrounded by buildings covered in graffiti and windows protected by metal bars. Camden's infrastructure has collapsed. Potholed streets, faulty streetlights, abandoned buildings that have become hideouts for criminals and drug users. The city had to dissolve its own police department in 2013 due to corruption and inefficiency, replacing it with a county police force. Even so, violence continues rampant. Gary, Indiana, is another disturbing example. This industrial city, once thriving thanks to its steel mills, is now a shadow of its former self. With the closure of the factories, Gary lost more than half of its population and became one of the poorest and most violent cities in the United States. Walking through the streets of Gary, you see entire blocks of abandoned houses, many of them burned or collapsing. The city center, once bustling, is now practically deserted. Historic buildings slowly rot, covered in graffiti and rust. The city has one of the highest homicide rates in the country, proportionally to its population. The city's infrastructure has collapsed. The situation in Gary is so dire that parts of the city have been literally abandoned by the authorities. There are no basic services in some areas, and residents report living without proper garbage collection, with streets full of debris and accumulated trash. The feeling is of a ghost town inhabited by people with no options to leave. East St. Louis, Illinois, completes this devastating picture. Separated from Missouri by the Mississippi River, East St. Louis was once an important industrial and transportation center. Today, it is one of the poorest and most violent cities in the United States, with almost half the population living below the poverty line. Violence in East St. Louis is endemic. The city has one of the highest homicide rates per capita in the country. Rival gangs fight for territory, and residents live in constant fear. Many houses have windows protected by wooden boards, and commercial establishments operate behind thick metal bars like bunkers. The physical deterioration of the city is shocking. Historic buildings are collapsing, streets are full of potholes, and basic infrastructure is in tatters. Public schools operate in precarious conditions without adequate resources. Life expectancy in East St. Louis is significantly lower than the national average, reflecting extremely difficult living conditions. What do these cities have in common? They have all been devastated by deindustrialization, population exodus, and government neglect. When factories closed, jobs disappeared. People with resources left, leaving behind those without the means to relocate. The tax base shrank drastically, leaving cities without the resources to maintain basic services. This neglect created a vicious cycle. Without legitimate jobs, many turned to the illegal economy, especially drug trafficking. Violence increased as gangs fought for territory. Families were destroyed, children grew up without structure, and entire generations were trapped in poverty. The lack of adequate policing allowed crime to spread unchecked. Flint, Michigan, became internationally known for its lead-contaminated water crisis, but the city's problems go far beyond that. Flint is another victim of the collapse of the auto industry, having lost nearly half its population since the 1960s. The city declared bankruptcy and was placed under state emergency administration. The water crisis in Flint exposed not only the decaying infrastructure, but also the criminal negligence of the authorities. For years, residents, many of them children, were poisoned by contaminated water while authorities denied the problem. The health consequences will be felt for decades, with children suffering irreversible neurological damage. But contaminated water is just a symptom of bigger problems. Flint has alarming rates of poverty, unemployment, and crime. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned, with empty houses that have become havens for criminal activity. The city lacks the resources to demolish thousands of dangerous structures that threaten public safety. Stockton, California, has the dubious distinction of being the largest American city to declare bankruptcy up to that point, in 2012. Located in the heart of California's Central Valley, Stockton suffers from extremely high crime rates, widespread poverty, and deteriorated infrastructure. The city was hit hard by the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, with one of the highest foreclosure rates in the country. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned, with empty and unmaintained houses rapidly deteriorating. Violence skyrocketed, with gangs controlling parts of the city and shootings becoming commonplace. Stockton also faces a housing shortage crisis, with thousands of people living on the streets or in makeshift camps. Public services have been drastically cut due to bankruptcy, leaving the city without adequate capacity to deal with growing social problems. Schools operate with minimal resources, and health services are scarce. Baltimore, Maryland, is a larger city facing similar challenges. Despite being home to important institutions and having prosperous areas, vast parts of Baltimore resemble desolate zones. Thousands of homes are empty and dilapidated, and violence is endemic in many neighborhoods. Baltimore consistently has one of the highest homicide rates among major American cities. The opioid crisis hit the city with devastating force, with overdose deaths skyrocketing. Neighborhoods like West Baltimore are marked by abandoned buildings, deserted streets, and a palpable sense of despair. A relação entre a comunidade e a polícia em Baltimore é extremamente tensa, especialmente após casos de brutalidade policial que ganharam atenção nacional. Protestos e distúrbios expuseram feridas profundas e a sensação de abandono sentida por muitos moradores. A confiança nas instituições está profundamente abalada. Youngstown, Ohio, é outra cidade do cinturão industrial que foi devastada pelo fechamento de fábricas. A indústria siderúrgica, que sustentou a cidade por décadas, entrou em colapso nos anos 70 e 80. Youngstown perdeu mais de 60% de sua população, deixando vastas áreas abandonadas. A cidade implementou um plano de encolhimento deliberado, reconhecendo que nunca voltaria ao tamanho anterior. Isso envolveu demolir milhares de estruturas e essencialmente abandonar bairros inteiros. O resultado é uma paisagem urbana pontilhada de lotes vazios onde antes havia comunidades vibrantes. A criminalidade em Youngstown é significativamente superior à média nacional. A cidade luta contra gangues, tráfico de drogas e violência doméstica. Com recursos limitados, os serviços de emergência são sobrecarregados e partes da cidade têm tempos de resposta extremamente lentos para chamadas de polícia e bombeiros. Trenton, Nova Jersey, capital do estado, enfrenta problemas graves apesar de sua importância política. A cidade tem altas taxas de pobreza, criminalidade rampante e deterioração urbana significativa. Bairros inteiros foram abandonados, com prédios históricos desabando lentamente. A violência em Trenton é particularmente preocupante, com tiroteios frequentes e uma taxa de homicídios que rivaliza com cidades muito maiores. Jovens crescem em ambientes dominados por gangues, com poucas oportunidades legítimas de progresso. O sistema educacional público está em crise, mal conseguindo cumprir suas funções básicas. O que todas essas cidades revelam é uma crise profunda no coração dos Estados Unidos. Enquanto algumas regiões prosperam, outras foram completamente abandonadas. A desigualdade não é apenas econômica, mas também geográfica. Milhões de americanos vivem em condições que muitos associariam com países muito mais pobres. As causas são complexas e interrelacionadas: desindustrialização, racismo sistêmico, políticas urbanas fracassadas, falta de investimento em educação e infraestrutura, a guerra às drogas que criminalizou gerações e uma rede de segurança social inadequada. O resultado são cidades que parecem ter sido abandonadas pelo país que as criou. Enquanto políticos debatem, essas comunidades continuam a sofrer. Crianças crescem em meio à violência, sem acesso à educação de qualidade ou oportunidades reais. Famílias lutam para sobreviver em ambientes tóxicos, literal e figurativamente. A cada ano que passa sem intervenção significativa, o problema se aprofunda e se torna mais difícil de resolver. Estas cidades americanas que parecem zonas de guerra são um lembrete sombrio de que o sonho americano não é acessível a todos. Para milhões, a realidade é um pesadelo de violência, pobreza e abandono. Até que haja vontade política e investimento real para reverter décadas de declínio, essas cidades continuarão a ser monumentos ao fracasso da promessa americana de oportunidade para todos.